Wyoming Territory, September 1879. The wind howled through the broken stained glass like a warning, but Beatrice Rourke did not flinch. She pulled her threadbare shawl tighter around her shoulders and curled deeper into the corner beneath the altar of the long-abandoned church. Her boots were soaked through, her palms scraped raw from the climb up the ravine after her horse collapsed 2 days back. She had not eaten since the last crust of hardtack yesterday morning. Her breath came out in soft white clouds. Still, it was shelter, and she had nowhere else to go. The church stood crooked on the edge of a forgotten trail, outside a mining town that had gone quiet after the silver dried up. Its roof sagged. The pews were splintered, but the stones still held. And Beatrice, who had run hard from a home that no longer wanted her, needed the stillness. Thunder cracked. Rain tapped at the broken panes. She closed her eyes, then came the voice, "You are not alone in here." She flinched upright, heart hammering against her ribs. A tall man stood in the doorway, framed by stormlight. He wore a black coat, damp at the hem, and carried a lantern that cast soft gold over his face. He looked more solid than the walls around him. His voice had the kind of calm that made you feel like you could finally exhale. "I did not mean to scare you," he said, stepping carefully into the nave. "I saw the light from town, thought maybe a traveler got caught in the storm." "I will be gone by morning," Beatrice said quickly, pushing herself to her feet. "I was not stealing, I did not say you were." The man stopped a few feet from her. "My name is Harlan Merrick." "I am the preacher in town," Beatrice blinked. "This church is abandoned." "It was," he said. "But I have been trying to bring it back one beam at a time. God does not stop listening just because the roof leaks." He looked at her, gentle but direct. "What is your name, Beatrice?" she said after a pause. "Rourke." "Well, Miss Rourke." He looked around, then set the lantern down on a cracked pew. "You look like you have not eaten. I have stew on at the parsonage. It is not much, but it is warm." She shook her head. "I do not take charity." "Good," he said simply. "Because I do not give it, I offer kindness. There is a difference." Beatrice hesitated. Her legs trembled from exhaustion and her stomach clenched at the thought of food. She searched his face, wary. But there was no false shine in his eyes, no hunger or pity, just quiet steadiness. "I will walk behind you," he added, sensing her hesitation. She nodded finally. The storm chased them down the trail. The parsonage was a modest cabin near the edge of town, smoke curling from its chimney. Inside, the air was warm and smelled of herbs and onions. Harlan handed her a towel and gestured to the bench beside the hearth. Beatrice sat, too tired to speak. He ladled stew into a bowl and set it in front of her. She ate slowly, hand shaking slightly. "You can sleep here tonight," he said, lighting a second lamp. "The spare room is clean, no one else lives here." She looked up. "You live alone." "I did not used to," he said, voice quieter now. "My wife died 7 years ago, fever." He cleared his throat. "It is just me now." "And the Lord," Beatrice looked into the flames. "I buried my brother last winter, diphtheria, he was all I had left." She did not know why she said it, but once the words came, she could not take them back. "After that, I tried staying with a cousin in Kansas." "Her husband made it clear I was not welcome." Harlan nodded. "I am sorry." He stood, hands folded behind his back. "The bed is yours, Miss Rourke. Sleep as long as you need." She woke to sunlight streaming through lace curtains and the scent of coffee. Harlan was outside chopping wood when she stepped onto the porch. "I can pull my weight," she said without greeting. "I can cook, clean, I'm not afraid of work." He lowered the axe, wiped his brow with his sleeve. "I never said you were." She looked down, then back up at him. "I do not know where I am going yet," he nodded. "Then stay until you do." And just like that, she did. Days passed. Beatrice swept the chapel, patched curtains, and polished the altar until the wood beneath her hands shone. Harlan worked beside her, sawing new boards, mending the roof. They moved in quiet rhythm, sharing meals and silence, sometimes laughter. He never asked more than she offered. But he listened, always listened. One evening, as the chapel bell rang for the first time in years, Beatrice stood beside him beneath the steeple. "You are giving this place back its voice," he said. She smiled faintly. "Maybe it is giving me mine." Harlan watched her, then reached into his coat pocket. "I was not sure if it was too soon, but I would rather risk too much than say too little." She turned toward him, brows drawn. He opened his hand. Inside was a simple silver ring. Beatrice stared at it, stunned. "I do not offer it out of obligation," he said. "You have brought life back into this home, into me. I want to build something with you, if you are willing." She looked at his hand, then at his face. "This is fast." "It is honest," he replied. Beatrice's throat tightened. She thought of the road behind her, cold, empty, littered with loss. Then she looked at Harlan, strong, kind, steady, and she saw not just shelter but something she had never thought she would find again: hope. She reached out and took the ring, slid it onto her finger. "I am willing," she whispered. They stood in the doorway of the church, hand in hand, as the sun dipped low behind the mountains, and for the first time in a long while Beatrice Rourke felt like she was finally home. By late October, the frost came in thin white sheets before dawn, and the cottonwoods along the creek turned brittle gold. Beatrice kept her hands in motion, stitching new altar linens from salvaged muslin, boiling soap over the fire pit behind the cabin, tamping down the last of the root cellar stores with straw. The days followed a rhythm she hadn't expected to find again. Not peace, not quite, but something steady enough to believe in. Harlan rose early each morning to walk the trail into town. He spent his hours at the schoolhouse or tending to those who wouldn't ask for help unless it arrived at their door. Beatrice joined him sometimes when he visited the widow Tabor, who'd lost her hearing after a mine blast. Harlan spoke with his hands as much as his mouth, and Beatrice watched how he waited for the old woman's nod before continuing, as though time itself would pause for her comfort. One afternoon, as they crossed the edge of the meadow, Beatrice carried a basket of preserves tied with muslin and twine. Her boots sank slightly in the wet ground. She glanced at Harlan. "You always did this?" she asked. "Before I came, I tried," he answered. "Folks don't always take to a preacher showing up uninvited. You soften the edge some." Beatrice didn't reply. The breeze carried the scent of pine resin. She let it fill her lungs. That night, as they sat inside by the lamplight, she ran her fingers along the grain of the table he'd built years before. The top was uneven, worn smooth at the edges by use. She set down her sewing. "You been thinking of her?" she asked softly. He looked up from where he sat oiling the hinges of a cabinet door, his brow furrowed slightly. "Your wife," she said. He set the tin of oil aside and wiped his hands on a cloth. "I think of her in the quiet hours, not the way I used to, not with sorrow, more like the way you remember the shape of a riverbed after the water's gone." Beatrice nodded, gaze steady. "I don't want to take up space that still belongs to someone else." "You don't," he said. "You've brought something different, not instead of." Beside. The wind rattled the window panes once, then fell quiet again. She stood, crossed to the shelf near the hearth, and pulled down a small tin box. "My brother used to keep coins in this," she said. "I never could bring myself to throw it out." She opened the lid and took out a folded slip of paper. "He wrote this the week before he passed. I never read it till spring." Harlan took it gently and read it in silence. "I'd forgotten the sound of my own voice," she said. "For a while, I thought maybe I didn't deserve another start." He handed the letter back without speaking. Then he reached across the table and took her hand, not with urgency, but with a kind of certainty that settled deep in her chest. "I'd like to plant winter wheat," he said. "There's a patch of land behind the chapel, just wide enough. We could manage it together." Beatrice turned her hand over in his, fingers curling into his palm. "I've never planted wheat." "I'll show you," he said. "We'll learn the rest as we go." That winter, the chapel held warmth despite its bare walls. Not from the stove, though they kept it fed with cottonwood and fir, but from the slow work of building a life that didn't lean away from grief, but allowed it to stay in the corners without taking the center. On Christmas morning, Harlan brought in a bundle wrapped in homespun. Inside was a bonnet the color of faded lavender and a pair of kid gloves that had once belonged to his sister, long past. Beatrice ran her thumb along the stitching, then looked up at him. "You always carry this much kindness in your pockets." He smiled, not wide, not showy, just enough that the corners of his eyes creased. "Not till you gave me somewhere to put it." She leaned forward and kissed him, a slow, quiet thing, like the first drop of rain on dry earth. When she pulled back, she didn't say anything more. She didn't need to. By the time the first snow blanketed the ridge, they had mended the chapel doors, whitewashed the walls, and planted onion sets in the garden behind the parsonage. The ring she wore caught the light when she reached for him, and he always met her hand without pause. There was no audience, no ceremony, just the two of them, side by side beneath the bare-limbed cottonwoods, the wind threading through the branches like a hymn. They didn't speak promises, they lived them. By early February, the wind had turned sharp enough to lift the edge of the roof tiles and whistle down the chimney flue. Beatrice stood at the chapel's back door, shaking out a rug stiff with ash dust. Her hands had chapped beneath her gloves, and she'd taken to rubbing lard along her knuckles every night. The cold settled into the bones of the building, and yet she found herself lingering longer in the nave, restoring a hymnbook spine with linen thread, or adjusting the wick in the oil sconces, until the light held steady against the pale gray of winter dusk. Inside, Harlan leaned over a ledger he'd brought in from the post. He had taken to tracking every small mercy that passed through their hands: a sack of flour left at the Nolan place, a calf birthed behind the Blackner barn, a letter delivered for old Mr. Havers in town who could no longer read fine print. He didn't speak of it as record-keeping. He called it witnessing. Beatrice came in, brushing snow from her shoulders. She set the rug by the hearth and pulled off her gloves. "There's a man near the West Ridge," she said, warming her fingers over the kettle. "Saw smoke from his chimney and tracks leading toward the bluff. You know who lives up there?" Harlan closed the ledger. "That'd be Elias Crane. Used to run freight between Rawlins and Laramie before his legs gave out. Stays up there mostly alone now. He's got a lean in his chimney. Won't last the thaw." Harlan studied her face. "You thinking of going up there?" She poured a cup of tea, then handed it to him. "If your legs don't work right, fixing a roof's a steep hope. I'm not saying I'll do it all, but I can carry a hammer." He blew on the tea before answering. "I'll come with you then." He's proud. Won't take kindly to pity, but he respects a steady hand. They made the walk 2 days later, packs on their backs, rope coiled under Beatrice's arm. The trail was narrow and crusted hard. They spoke little, saving breath for the climb, but when they reached the cabin, Elias was already standing in the doorway, wrapped in a buffalo hide and leaning on 2 carved canes. "I heard you coming," he said, voice like dry gravel. "You're the preacher's woman." Beatrice stepped forward. "I'm Beatrice Merrick," Elias squinted. "You weren't Merrick last time I seen you." She looked him in the eye. "People change names when they mean to stay." He nodded once, then turned to Harlan. "You come to bless my firewood?" "Only if it's possessed," Harlan said. "We brought nails." "We saw the chimney," Elias grunted. "I'm not dead yet." "No one said you were," Beatrice replied. "But if you freeze through the roof, you might be by spring." That earned a dry chuckle. He stepped aside and let them in. The cabin was small but well kept. Beatrice handed Harlan the rope and started unpacking the tools. Elias watched her from his chair by the hearth, eyes sharp. "You're not like the others," he said. "I haven't met the others," she replied, climbing onto the stool to check the rafters. "But I was raised to dust my own shelves and patch my own skirts. I figure a roof's not much different. Where you from?" "Nowhere I mean to return to." He didn't ask more, and she didn't offer. They worked until dusk, patching the chimney with salvaged stone and sealing the cracks with clay from the riverbank below. Elias insisted on feeding them from his last jar of venison and a heel of cornbread. Harlan read aloud from a tattered Whittier collection while he ate, and Elias leaned back with a sigh, as if the sound of words was heavier than the wind outside. When they returned home that night, Beatrice kicked the snow from her boots and hung her coat by the stove. She watched Harlan light the mantel lamp, his sleeves rolled back, forearms dusted with dirt from the climb. "You were quiet today," she said. "I was watching you," he admitted. "You carry yourself with purpose now." She untied her kerchief and laid it over the back of a chair. "I was never without it, I just hadn't been trusted to use it." He walked over and took her hand. The skin of his palm was rough, calloused, familiar now. "I trust you," he said, simple as breath. She looked down at their joined hands. "I used to think quiet was the same as loneliness, but this—" Her voice caught for a moment. "This feels like standing still because you want to, not because you've been left behind." He rested his forehead against hers. "We're not standing still, we're building." Outside, the wind had settled. Inside, the kettle began to sing. They didn't speak again that evening, but the silence wasn't empty. It held shape, like something carved with care. And when they lay down beneath the quilt stitched from her brother's old shirts and the linen from Harlan's youth, Beatrice reached for him in the dark and found him already reaching back by mid-March. The thaw had begun in earnest. Snow pulled back from the hollows, leaving behind dark earth and the smell of wet cedar. Beatrice stood at the edge of the parsonage garden, a spade in her hands, sleeves rolled to her elbows. Her palms ached from the morning's work turning soil that had lain dormant for years, but she didn't mind the ache. It was the kind that stayed with you in a good way, like a melody you hadn't heard in a long time but still remembered the words to. Harlan stepped out from the chapel, a small satchel slung over his shoulder. "I'm heading down to Y Post. The Mac Allen sent word cattle fell through the ice. They'll need help hauling the carcasses before they spoil." Beatrice wiped her forehead with the back of her wrist. "You'll be back tonight, if the wagon holds," he said, "and the mule doesn't plant its feet like last time." He adjusted the strap and paused. "There's a letter under the lamp. Came in yesterday's mail. Your name's on it." She watched him disappear down the trail, the satchel bouncing against his back, and only when the trees swallowed him did she go inside. The letter was folded with care, addressed in a precise, unfamiliar script. She sat on the bench by the hearth and opened it slowly, fingertips smudged with loam. "Beatrice, I don't know where you've gone, but I hope you've found a place to land. I'm sorry for the way things ended. I was afraid. That's no excuse, but it's the truth. I think of you often. If you write, I'll answer. I hope you are warm and safe." Louisa Beatrice folded the letter and set it aside. She didn't cry. That part of her had dried up a long time ago, but she sat there a while, the fire crackling low, hands resting in her lap. When she stood, she didn't look back at the note. That evening, she climbed the ladder into the chapel rafters to repair a warped beam that had started to bow under the winter's weight. She moved carefully, her boots placed with precision, breath steady. When the sun dipped below the ridge and the light turned copper, Harlan returned, boots mudded to the ankles, his coat damp from the slush. "You went up alone?" he asked, looking up at her. "I couldn't wait," she said. "Didn't want to leave it sagging." He set down the satchel. "You always move toward what needs doing, never away." She climbed down, landing lightly beside him. "I got a letter," she said. He tilted his head. "Good news." "It was from my cousin." She pulled off her gloves, "The one who turned me out." He didn't reach for her, didn't press, just waited. "I don't hold anything against her anymore," she said. "But I won't answer." He nodded once. "That's your right." She looked at the chapel, its bones stronger now with each board they'd laid, each nail driven through grief and into something firmer. "I used to think there was a line between what I wanted and what I deserved, but they're starting to look the same." Harlan took her hand. "You've never been anything but worthy." She stepped closer. "I want to marry you again," she said, "properly, not just a ring and a quiet moment. I want to stand in that chapel with the doors open and the light coming through and say it where the whole world could hear if they were listening." His voice was low but sure. "Then we'll do it, on your terms." They set the date for the first Sunday after the thaw, word spread on its own. Miss Sutter brought wild plum jam in exchange for a seat. The Tabor girl offered to play her father's fiddle. Even Elias Crane sent a carved cross, rough-hewn and heavier than it looked. Beatrice stitched her own dress from bolt ends she'd traded for lye soap and dried beans. It wasn't white, more the color of soft wheat, but it fit her well, and she liked how it moved when she walked. The morning sun came warm through the windows. The chapel pews were full of neighbors who hadn't set foot inside in years. Harlan stood waiting at the altar, coat brushed clean, hands folded like he'd been born to that spot. Beatrice entered alone. No one gave her away. She had given herself. Her voice didn't tremble when she spoke her vows. She looked him in the eye and promised not just love but presence. Not just loyalty, but the kind of patience that let things grow, when it was done. And they stepped outside into the spring morning, the crowd scattered back to their lives, and she and Harlan walked hand in hand to the edge of the field behind the chapel. The wheat shoots had broken through the ground. She knelt and touched one, the green bright against the dirt. "We'll have something to harvest." He stood behind her, one hand resting lightly on her shoulder. "We already do." She looked up at him then, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. The wind moved through the valley, soft and clean, and everything ahead felt wide open and waiting. The wheat grew shoulder-high by June, thick with the scent of sun-warmed earth and wind. On the longest days, Beatrice rose before light touched the hills, pulling her apron over her nightdress and stepping barefoot into the dew to check for signs of rust or beetles. Harlan joined her after the morning bell, trailing behind with a wrapped biscuit or two and a quiet word about the clouds. The air felt different now, weighty with the promise of harvest. Nothing rushed. Nothing wasted. One morning, as she carried a pail of water from the well, Beatrice paused to rest beneath the eaves. Her back ached from bending long over the garden rows, and her thoughts drifted toward the far edge of the field where the soil dipped slightly, softening the grain's height. She squinted across the distance. "There's a patch going thin," she said when Harlan came up beside her, wiping his hands on a rag. "I noticed," he said. "We can sow buckwheat there next season. It'll hold the soil." She nodded, then looked at him sidelong. "You always see what's next before I do." "I watch what you tend to," he said. "That tells me what matters." She smiled, small and sure. "I've been thinking about a schoolroom." He leaned against the railing, brow lifting. "There's a teacher comes up from Fort Fred every third month." "That's not enough," she said. "The Nolan girl, she's near 10, can't read past the signs at the depot, and the young ones from the ridge can't come down in winter." Harlan folded his arms. "You teach. If I can read a ledger and copy scripture, I can teach a child to hold a pencil right." He didn't question her. He only asked, "Where?" "I thought maybe the old smokehouse," she said. "The beams are sound." "We could open one side for light." He turned to look at the weathered building across the yard. "It'll take some doing." "All the good things have," she said. By mid-July, the structure stood open to the breeze, stripped of its soot and scrubbed with lye. Beatrice tacked oilcloth to the windows and built benches from leftover planks. Word spread again, not through announcements, but through the quiet way people watched what was being made and decided to meet it. One afternoon, as she chalked letters onto the board with the Nolan girl watching close, Harlan stepped in with a bundle wrapped in sackcloth. "For your classroom," he said, setting it down. Inside was a slate map of the territories and a thick reader bound in red twill. She touched the cover, then looked up. "Where'd you find these?" "Traded with the circuit pastor," he said. "He had more than he needed. I told him you'd make use." She closed the book gently. "You've given me so much. I don't know how to say it anymore." "Then don't," he said, brushing a curl from her cheek. "Just keep making room for more." That night they sat on the porch, the air thick with the hum of insects and the scent of wild sage. She rested her head against his shoulder. "Did you ever think you'd have this?" she asked. He was quiet a moment. "Not after Anna. I figured I'd serve until my hands gave out, then go quietly." And now he turned his face toward her hair. "Now I want to grow old watching you write names on chalkboards and dig roots from the hillside." She turned toward him, her fingers finding his. "I want a child," she said softly, "not from loneliness, from fullness." His hand tightened around hers. Then we will. By autumn, the wheat was stacked in shocks, the cellar packed with pickled beans and jars of apples. The schoolroom held 6 children by name, their voices rising with each lesson. Beatrice taught them to read from the red-bound book, to write their letters straight, and to share the last biscuit without prompting. She felt the change first in late October, a stillness in her body that wasn't weariness. She waited until the signs were clear, then met Harlan outside the chapel. "I'll need to let the Nolan girl lead lessons some mornings," she said. He looked at her and something in his face stilled. "You're certain?" She nodded. "I'm not afraid." "Neither am I," he said. "Not with you." Winter came soft that year, snow falling in gentle flurries, the wind less cruel than before. Beatrice moved slower now, her hand resting often against her belly. The townsfolk brought her ginger water and quilts stitched from old coats. Elias sent a cradle carved from pine, rough-edged but sturdy. She gave birth in early spring, beneath the same cottonwoods that had once watched her marry. Harlan never left her side. The baby came strong and red-faced, with hands that curled instantly around Beatrice's finger. They named her Clara after Harlan's mother and wrapped her in the same linen Beatrice had once used to bind books. The first time Harlan held her, he said nothing. He only looked at the child and then at Beatrice, and she saw in his eyes the prayer he didn't speak. Years passed. The chapel filled on Sundays. The schoolroom grew too small and was rebuilt beside the garden with help from half the town. Clara learned her letters early and helped her mother mark lessons for the younger ones. She grew straight and bright-eyed, her hair the color of wheat in full sun. Harlan built a bench beneath the cottonwoods, and each evening he and Beatrice sat there, watching the land they had shaped with their hands and their hard-earned hope. They didn't speak often. They didn't need to. They had made something lasting, and nothing had been wasted.